Every detail of the wedding was meticulously planned: the flowers, the music, the vows, but Noon could have anticipated what happened next. Just as the bride reached the altar, a scruffy stray dog padded into the grand hall, interrupting the ceremony with an urgency that left everyone stunned. At first the guests chuckled, thinking it was a light-hearted mishap, but what unfolded in the moments that followed brought the entire room to tears and changed the lives of those present forever. The wedding day had dawned with a golden glow, and the air was alive with anticipation. The grand hall of St. Milan's Church was adorned with white lights and soft twinkling lights, creating an atmosphere of pure magic. Guests whispered excitedly, their seats filled with close family friends and even distant acquaintances, all eager to witness the union of Emily and David, a couple whose love story had captured the hearts of everyone around them. Emily stood in the antechamber, her heart fluttering with excitement and nervousness. She adjusted her veil one last time, glancing at the reflection in the ornate mirror. Her ivory gown sparkled as the sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting a rainbow of colors across the room. Her bridesmaids surrounded her, offering last-minute encouragement and fussing over every tiny detail of her attire. It was a moment of joy and promise, the culmination of months of meticulous planning and years of love. Meanwhile, in the main hall, David stood at the altar, his hands clasped tightly together. He wore a tailored navy suit, his normally calm demeanor lightly shaken by the weight of the moment. His best man leaned over, offering a reassuring pat on the back. The music began to swell, signaling that it was time. David took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was meant to be the happiest day of his life. The doors to the hall creaked open, and Emily appeared, her arm linked with her father's. Gasps of admiration rippled through the crowd as she began her walk down. These lively steps she took seemed to echo with the love and support of those gathered, yet just as she reached the midway point, an unexpected figure entered the scene. A scruffy golden-haired stray dog trotted into the hall, its coat slightly matted but its posture proud. First, the guests chuckled, assuming the dog had wandered in by mistake, but the laughter quickly turned to murmurs of confusion as the dog padded steadily down the aisle, heading straight for Emily. The animal's eyes were locked on her, as if it were on a mission. Emily froze in her tracks, her grip on her father tightening. The dog stopped a few feet away from her, sitting down and tilting its head as though waiting for something. The hall fell silent, the once buzzing excitement replaced by a collective sense of curiosity and unease. The officiant, visibly startled, cleared his throat, unsure how to proceed. David stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Who dog is this?" hissed his voice, cutting through the silence. The dog didn't move. It simply sat there, looking between Emily and David with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Maybe it's hungry," someone whispered from the back row. A few chuckles followed, but the tension in the room was palpable. Emily knelt down slowly, her gown pooling around her. She extended her hand toward the dog. Her voices of "There, buddy, are you lost?" The dog's tail wagged slightly, but it didn't move closer, and instead it barked, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed through the hall. That bark was unlike any Emily had ever heard. It wasn't playful or frightened. It carried to weight a sense of purposes. He looked into the dog's eyes and felt a strange connection, as if it were trying to tell her something. For a moment, she forgot about the hundreds of eyes on her, the ceremony, and even David. All she could focus on was the dog, and the inexplicable feeling stirring within her. "What's going on?" David asked, his tone laced with irritation. He approached Emily, extending a hand to help her stand. The dog demeanor shifted. Instantly it rose to its feet, stepping protectively between Emily and David. A low growl rumbled from its throat, sending a ripple of shock through the audience. Did it just growl at me?" David asked, his voice rising. He glanced at the guests, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Someone get this mute out of here." Emily stood, her gazes still locked on the dog. "Wait," she said, firmly holding up a hand. "Something's not right." She looked back at the dog, whose growl had subsided, but whose stance remained defensive. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" Her father stepped forward, his face a mix of concern and confusion. "Emily, it's just a dog. Let's get on with the ceremony." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to interruption. The dog barked again, this time glancing at David with a sharpness that made her stomach churn. "No," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "This isn't random." David's face darkened. "Emily, this is ridiculous. It's astray. Ignore it." From the crowd. Emily crouched again and placed a hand on the dog's head. It relaxed slightly under her touch, but kept its gaze fixed on David. "Why are you so upset?" she murmured. The dog's tail thumped against the floor and it licked her hand, as if urging her to trust it. The tension in the room was nearly unbearable. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the dog turned and lunged at David's feet. Gasps filled the hall as it grabbed the corner of his pant leg and tugged, revealing a folded piece of paper that had Been tucked inside his sock, the dog dropped it at Emily's feet and stepped back, wagging its tail as if its job was done. Emily hesitated, her hands trembling. As she picked up the paper, her heart raced as she unfolded it and read the words scrolled across the page. Her breath hitched, and she looked up at David, her face pale. What is this?" she whispered. David's expression shifted from irritation to panic. "It's nothing," he said quickly, but Emily stepped back, clutching the paper tightly. The dog growled again, planting itself firmly in front of her. Emily's voice trembled as she addressed, "David, you have some explaining to do." The atmosphere in the grand hall had shifted completely. The joyous anticipation of a wedding had been replaced by an oppressive tension. All eyes were on Emily, clutching the mysterious piece of paper, and David, whose composure seemed to be unraveling with each passing second. The dog standing steadfast by Emily's side seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Its eyes darted between Emily and David, its posture protective and unwavering. "Emily," David said, his voice a mix of panic and desperation, "let's not make a scene. This is supposed to be our special day." Ignoring him, Emily unfolded the paper once more, her fingers trembling. The words stared back at her, sharp and clear: "Transfer of funds, $500. Thousand upon confirmation of marriage license." Her mind raced, struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. Was this some kind of agreement, a mistake? She looked up at David, her voice unsteady. "What is this?" David took a step forward, his hand reaching out as if to snatch the paper. "Emily, it's nothing, just some legal paperwork for the prenup. You don't need to worry about it." "Legal paperwork?" Emily's voice cracked with disbelief. "This doesn't look like a prenup, David. It looks like a transaction." Her words hung in the air like a bombshell. The guests began to whisper, their murmurs growing louder as confusion turned into suspicion. "David, what's going on?" Emily's father demanded, stepping forward to stand by his daughter's side. His protective instinct flared as she glanced between the paper and the groom. David's facade began to crumble, his polished demeanor gave way to frustration and anger. "This is absurd. Has napped. That dog is causing chaos, and you're letting it ruin our day. Let's get back to the ceremony." But Emily wasn't about to be brushed aside, her instincts sharpened by strange behavior and the unsettling dis. "I told her something wasn't right." "No," she said firmly, her voice louder now. "We're not going anywhere until you explain this." The dog barked sharply as if in agreement, drawing gasps from the crowd. Emily knelt beside it, once more running a hand through its fury. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've been trying to protect me." David's irritation boiled over. "For God's sake, Emily, it's a stray dog. It doesn't know anything." "Then why does it seem to know more than I do?" Emily shot back, here, yes, blazing her confidence. Grew ass he realized she wasn't alone. This dog, this unexpected guardian, had seen through David before anyone else, one of Emily's bridesmaids. Sarah stepped forward hesitantly. "Emily, maybe you should check his things just to be sure." Her voice was soft but resolute, and the suggestions sparked a ripple of murmurs among the guests. David's reaction was immediate and telling. "Absolutely not," he barked. "I won't have my privacy violated because of some ridiculous accusations." Emily narrowed her eyes. "If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind." She turned to her father, her voice is steadier now. "Did check his jacket?" David protested vehemently, his voice growing louder and more frantic, but Emily's father didn't hesitate. He approached David, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit. From within, he pulled out a folded envelope. The guests craned their necks, straining to see what was happening, and Emily's father handed her the envelope, his expression grim. "You need to see this." Emily's hand shook as she opened it, revealing a series of documents. "Here, yes." Scanned the pages, her breath catching in her throat as the truth unraveled. Before her, it wasn't just a single transaction. There were detailed plans outlining a financial arrangement that hinged entirely on their marriage. The words payout, conditional agreement, and termination clause jumped out at her like red flags. "What is this, David?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. David's face turned pale, and for a moment he looked as if he might faint. "Not what it looks like," he stammered, backing away. "I can't explain." Emily's voice rose here, motions boiling over. "You were planning to marry me for money. Was any of this real? Were you ever even honest with me?" The guests erupted into a cacophony of gasps and whispers. Some looked on in horror, while others muttered angrily among themselves. The officiant stood, frozen, his hands clutching the ceremonial book as if it might provide some kind of divine guidance. In the chaos, David attempted to regain control of the situation. "Emily, listen to me. It's more complicated than that. Save it." She come off, her voice cold. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore." She held up the papers for all to see. "This is who he really is." At that moment, the dog barked again, this time circling around Emily protectively. Its actions felt deliberate, almost as if it were standing guard against David. The sight sent a wave of awe through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That dog just saved her life." David's panic turned to anger. "You're all blowing this out of proportion." He shouted, his voice cracking, that has nothing to do with anything, but the truth was undeniable. Emily turned to the guests, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. This isn't just about me, it's about trusting your instincts. See, even when it feels like the world is against you. She looked down at the dog, her expressions of tending. Sometimes the ones who protect us come from the most unexpected places. The dog wagged its tail, sensing Emily's gratitude. Its job, it seemed, was far from over as the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Emily clutched the damning documents to her chest, their breath shallow but steady. The weight of betrayal pressed down on her, but the unwavering presence of the stray dog others-eyed gave her anchor. It stood tall, its eyes fixed on David, emitting a low protective growl that resonated through the room. The guests, initially stunned by the turn events, began glances, some whispered words of admiration for the dog, others of disbelief at David's exposed deception. Emily's father stepped forward, again his stern gaze fixed on David. Young man, he said in a voice that commanded silence, you owe me, daughter, and everyone here an explanation. Now David hesitated, his confidence clearly shaken. The man who had moments ago stood at the altar, a beacon of charm, now looked like a cornered animal. This is a misunderstanding, he began, his voice unsteady. Those documents, they old agreements, they don't mean anything anymore. Old agreements. Emily snapped, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. These aren't just some outdated contracts. David, they're proof that you were planning to exploit me. How can you even stand here? And Leith, the dog, barked sharply, as if punctuating her words, and the sound sent a ripple of unease through the room. Emily knelt beside it, again stroking its fur with trembling hands. You knew all along, didn't you? She murmured, her voice off but filled with emotion. You were trying to warn me. The officiant cleared his throat, attempting to restore some semblance of order. Perhaps, he said cautiously, we should take a moment to step aside and resolve this privately. But Emily shook her head. No, she said firmly, standing to her full height. This isn't something that needs to be resolved privately. Everyone deserves to know the truth. She turned to the guest, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. David tried to use me for his own gain. He didn't care about me, my family, or any of you, and if it weren't for this dog, I might never have known. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs, and David's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. That's enough, he shouted, stepping forward aggressively. You're making a spectacle of something that doesn't concern anyone else. The dog growled louder, stepping between Emily and David, its posture unyielding. Emily's father, a protective arm around his daughter, glaring at David. It concerns all of us when someone tries to manipulate and deceive their way into this family, he said. And if I you so much as raise your voice at my daughter again, I'll make sure you regret it. David seemed to shrink under the collective judgment of the room. He glanced around, realizing there was no escape from the eyes boring into him from every direction. He opened his mouth to speak, but now words came out. That moment, one of Emily's bridesmaids, Sarah, stepped forward, holding her phone. Emily, she said hesitantly, I think you should see this. She handed the phone to Emily, who glanced at the screen and felt their stomach drop. It was a series of text messages between David and an unknown number. The messages laid out in chilling detail the plan to gain Emily's trust, secure their marriage, and access her family's wealth. Phrases like final step, timing is everything, and don't let her suspect a thing were burned into her mind. Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she handed the phone to her father, who read the messages with a growing fury. You disgust me, he said to David. To think we welcomed you into our home, into our lives. David's mask of calm cracked completely. It's not what it looks like, he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. I can explain, but his words were drowned out by the rising anger of the crowd. Guests began to stand, their voices joining in a chorus of outrage. Get them out of here, someone shouted. How dare he try to ruin her life? David turned toward the exit, but the dog barked sharply, blocking his path. Its presence was like an immovable wall, and David hesitated, unsure of what to do. Emily's brothers stepped forward, flanking him on either side. You're not going anywhere, one of them said, his voice cold and firm. Not until the authorities arrive. Authorities? David's voice cracked with fear. You're overreacting. This isn't necessary. Oh, it's necessary, Sarah interjected, crossing her arms. How you don't get to manipulate someone and walk away without consequences. As the tension reached its peak, the sirens pierced the air, growing louder. By the second, the guests turned toward the entrance, where two uniformed officers appeared. Emily's father waved the mover, handing them the documents and Sarah's phone. This man has been exposed for fraud and attempted exploitation. He explained, we want them removed from this property immediately. David protested, his voice rising in panicky. You can't. Doth this? I haven't done anything illegal. The officer raised an eyebrow. We'll let the evidence speak for itself, he said, motioning for David to follow. When David hesitated, the officer added, you can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. David's shoulders slumped in defeat, and he allowed himself to be escorted out of the hall. She passed Emily. He turned to her one last time. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth. "Oh, it's over, Emily," replied her voice, unwavering thanks to him. She gestured toward the dog, who wagged its tail. As if understanding the praise, the guests erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. Emily knelt beside the dog, wrapping her arms around it. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved Method Dog." Nuzzled her gently, its warm presence a reminder that even in moments of darkness, light could come from the most unexpected sources. As the police car's red and blue lights faded into the distance, the grand hall buzzed with a mix of relief and disbelief. Emily stood in the center of the room, her ivory gown catching the soft light from the chandeliers above. Despite the overwhelming chaos, her focus remained on the dog sitting faithfully at her side. It looked up at her, its expressive eyes seeming to ask, "Are you okay?" A gentle touch on her shoulder made her turn. It was Sarah, holding out a handkerchief. "You're stronger than anyone." "I know," she said softly. Emily managed a faint smile, dabbing at her tears. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. She crouched down to the dog's level, stroking its head. "And thank you, too. I don't know how you knew, but you saved me. You saved all of us." Her father approached his towering frame, casting a protective shadow over her. "Emily," he said gently, "you don't have to decide anything right now. We can't take this one step at a time." Emily nodded, her mind still racing with questions and emotions. "I know," she replied, her voice is steadier. "But there's one thing I'm sure of." She looked back at the dog, who wagged its tail tentatively. "He's coming home with me." The dog barked softly, almost as if it understood her words, and the crowd let out a collective sigh of admiration. A voice from the back of the hall called out, "That dog's a hero!" Interrupted, and for the first time that day, Emily felt a glimmer of hope amid the ruins of her wedding day. As the guests began to disperse, Emily found herself surrounded by family and friends offering their support. "We'll take care of everything," Sarah assured her, gesturing toward the wedding decorations. "You don't need to worry about a thing." Emily thanked her, grateful for the love and care she was receiving. But as she glanced around the room, her gaze kept returning to the dog. Its unwavering presence had been her anchor through the storm, and now it felt like the only constant in an otherwise shattered reality. That evening, as the last of the guests left and the once bustling hall grew silent, Emily sat on the steps of the grand entrance, the dog curled up beside her, resting its head on her lap. The cool night air carried a sense of calm that she hadn't felt in weeks. "You're quite the guardian, aren't you?" she murmured, running her fingers through its fur. The dog let out a contented say, its tail thumping softly against the marble steps. Her father stepped outside, carrying her coat. "It's getting chilly," he said, draping it over her shoulders. She hesitated before adding, "I've called the lawyer. We'll ensure David is for what he's done." Emily nodded, her focus still on the dog. "You should have seen the signs," she said, her voice tinged with regret, "but I ignored them because I wanted to believe in him." Her father crouched down, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "You're not to blame for his actions. What matters is that you're safe now, thanks to this little hero." He reached out to pat the dog, who wagged its tail appreciatively. The drive home was quiet, the events of the day playing on a loop in Emily's mind. The dog sat in the back seat, its head resting on the window, gazing out the passing lights. Every shift in it would glance at Emily, as if reassuring her that it was still there once home. Emily opened the door to her modest but cozy apartment. The dog trotted in, sniffing the air curiously before settling on the plush rug in the living room. Emily watched it for a moment before retrieving a bowl and filling it with water. "You must be thirsty," she said, placing it near the rug. The dog lapped up the water eagerly, then looked up at her with what seemed like gratitude. Over the next few days, Emily began to build her life one small step at a time. The dog quickly adapted to its new home, following her from room to room and curling up at her feet whenever she sat down to work or rest. Its presence was a source of comfort, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Word of the dog's heroic actions spread quickly, and soon Emily was receiving calls from reporters and curious neighbors. "You've got a real life lassie there," one journalist said during an interview, but Emily waved off the attention, insisting that the dog was simply doing what it felt was right. One afternoon, while walking the dog in the park, Emily encountered men walking. A German shepherd has stopped and smiled, nodding toward her furry companion. "That's a beautiful dog," he said. "What's its name?" Emily hesitated, realizing she hadn't yet given it. Then she looked down at the dog, which wagged its tail happily at the "Attention, Hero," she said finally. "His name is Hero." The man chuckled. "Fitting name for a dog like that." As the weeks turned into months, Emily and Hero became inseparable. She often reflected on how much her life had changed since that fateful day. Hero had not only saved her from a disastrous marriage, but also taught her the value of trust and intuition whenever doubts crept into her mind. She looked at Hero in a renewed sense of strength. On evening, as Emily sat on her balcony with Hero by her side, she gazed out at the city lights. She said, scratching behind his ears. I think you came into my life for areas and maybe to remind me that sometimes the answers we're looking for are right in front of us. Shero barked softly, his eyes full of understanding for the first time. In a long while, Emily felt truly at peace. The weeks following the wedding brought a mixture of calm and chaos to Emily's life. Thought the immediate danger was gone, the emotional aftermath lingered her on now officially. Named and registered Asher Dog remained by her side through every moment. This presence was a source of strength, a quiet reminder that loyalty and intuition could triumph over deceit. Emily spent her mornings immersed in work, diving into projects that had been on hold during the whirlwind of wedding planning, but no matter how busy her day became, she always carved out time for her. Their evening walks through the local park became a cherished routine, offering a chance for both of them to breathe and reset. It was during one of these walks that Emily's life took another unexpected turn. Harrow strutting ahead, his leash slack in her hand, when he suddenly froze, his ears perking up. Emily followed his gaze to see a man sitting on a bench feeding crumbs to a flock of pigeons. The man looked up, and their eyes met, a smile, a warm, genuine smile that immediately put the rate a nice evening for a walk, he said, his voice carrying a friendly tone. Emily nodded. Diddish, her loves it out the reet. The sound of his name. Hero wagged his tail, and the man chuckled. Hero, that's quite a name he looks like he's earned it. Emily couldn't help but smile. He's saved me in more ways than one. The man stood brushing crumbs off his jeans. I'm Daniel, he said, extending a hand. Big dog lover myself, Emily replied, shaking his hand. And this is Hero. Daniel crouched to Hero's level, letting the dog sniff his hand before giving him a friendly pat. Hero responded with a wag of his tail, clearly approving of the new acquaintance. Over the next few weeks, Emily and Daniel crossed paths frequently during her walks with her. Other conversations grew longer, evolving from casual pleasantries to deeper discussions about their lives, their passions, and their struggles. Emily found herself opening up to Daniel in a way she hadn't expected. She shared the story of the wedding and how Hero had stepped in at just the right moment. Daniel listened intently, his expression a mixture of empathy and admiration. You're stronger than you think, he told her one evening as they sat on a park bench. And Hero, he's more than just a dog, he's your guardian. Emily looked down at Hero, how was resting his head on her lap. Uli, as she agreed softly. I don't know what I'd do without him. Asher bond with deepened. Emily found herself beginning to health. A betrayal that had once consumed her thoughts started to fade, replaced by a growing sense of hope. Hero, ever watchful and loyal, seemed to approve of the new direction her life was taking. He greeted Daniel with enthusiasm whenever they met. Sensing his positive influence, one rainy afternoon, Daniel invited Emily and Hero to visit a local animal shelter, where he volunteered. I think you'd love it there, he said, and Hero might enjoy meeting some new friends. The shelter was a modest building on the outskirts of town, but its warmth and energy were palpable. Dozens of dogs of all shapes and sizes greeted them with wagging tails and hopeful eyes. Emily felt a pang of sadness, imagining the stories behind each dog's journey to the shelter. This is what I do on weekends, Danielle explained, a shelter through the rows of kennels. These guys need all the love and care they can get. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Thoreau walked alongside them, sniffing curiously at the other dogs. A ton kennel had paused, his tail wagging as she locked eyes with a small, scruffy puppy. The puppy barked excitedly, pressing its nose against the bars. Look, Hero's made a friend, Daniel said with a laugh. Emily crouched down to the puppy level, heart melting at its eager expression. He's adorable, she said, reaching through the bars to scratch behind its ears. Daniel smiled. He been here for a few weeks, sweet little guy, if you're interested. Emily hesitated, glancing at Hero. What do you think, boy? Should we bring him home? Hero barked softly as if giving his approval. Emily laughed. Her decision made. All right, she said, looking up at Daniel. Let's do it. The drive home with the new puppy, whom Emily decided to name Chance, was filled with excitement. Hero's to take his role as the older siblings seriously, keeping a watchful eye on Chance as the puppy explored his new surroundings. Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of completeness as she watched the two dogs interact, their bond forming almost instantly as the weeks passed. Emily's life began to settle into a new rhythm. Her days were filled with work, evenings with walks and playtime with her, and Chance and her weekends with Daniel. The scars from her past hadn't completely faded, but they no longer defined her. She was moving forward one step at a time, surrounded by love and loyalty. One evening, as she sat on her porch with Hero and Chance curled up at her feet, Emily reflected on everything that had brought her to this moment. She looked out at the setting sun, its warm light casting a golden glow over her small, peaceful world. Hero, she said softly, stroking his fury, you've taught me so much about trust, about courage, and about listening to my instincts. I don't think I would have made it without you. Hero looked up at her, his eyes full of understanding. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude, and now shedded, glancing at Chance. We've got a new adventure ahead of us. the little puppy Ned nestling closer to Hero, who gently rested his head on Chance's tinny body. Emily leaned back, her worries fading away as the night embraced them for the first time. And along while she felt truly at peace, the seasons began to change, bringing a crispness to the air that hinted that the arrival of autumn. Emily's small home, once filled with silence and shadows, now brimmed with life and warmth. Hero and Chance had become inseparable, their playful antics filling her days with laughter. Daniel's presence too grew more constant, his steady support and kind-heartedness helping Emily rebuild her confidence and trust. One Saturday morning, Emily decided to tackle the overgrown garden in her backyard. Armed with gloves and pruning shears, she stepped outside Hero, and Chance trailing behind her. The two dogs immediately began exploring with Hero, keeping a watchful eye on his younger companion as Chance sniffed and darted through the tall grass. Daniel arrived shortly after, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries. "Thought you might need reinforcement," she said with a grin. Emily laughed, taking the tray from him. "You read me mind. This place is a jungle." They worked side by side, clearing weeds and planting new flowers. As the sun climbed higher, the yard began to transform into a vibrant and inviting space. Hero and Chance lounged nearby, occasionally chasing each other in bursts of energy before collapsing in a heap under the shade of a tree. East they paused to admire their progress. Daniel turned to Emily. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" she asked, sipping her coffee. Daniel hesitated, his expression growing thoughtful. "I think Hero and Chance have inspired me, watching them. Seeing their loyalty and resilience, it's made me realize how much animals can teach us." Emily smiled, reaching down to scratch Hero behind the ears. "They've certainly taught me a lot." "What are you thinking?" "I want to start a project," Dan said, his voice gaining enthusiasm. "A nonprofit, maybe focused on rescuing and rehabilitating animals. We could share their stories, show people how much these animals have tougher, and who knows, maybe it'll inspire others the way Hero inspired you." Emily's eyes lit up. "That's an incredible idea. I'd love to help. However, I can't." They spent the rest of the afternoon brainstorming, their conversation filled with possibilities and plans. Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose as they discussed ways to make the project a reality. Hero and Chance seemed to sense the excitement, their wagging tails a constant backdrop to the conversation. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Emily and Daniel worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life, reaching out to local and animal advocates for support. They named the nonprofit Home's Wheat Paws, a tribute to the journey that had brought them together and to the countless animals they hoped to help. Hero and Chance became the unofficial mascots of the organization, their stories serving as a powerful reminder of the bond between humans and animals. Emily shared their tale in community events and online, her voice steady and confident as she recounted how Hero's unwavering intuition had saved her life. Their response was overwhelming, with people from all walks of life reaching out to share their own stories and offer their support. An evening, as Emily sat at her desk drafting a proposal for a local grant, she glanced over at their own. Chance curled up together on the rug, her heart swelled with gratitude as she thought about how far they had come from the chaos of that interrupted wedding to the peace and purpose they had found together. It had been a journey of healing and discovery. Daniel walked in, carrying 2 mugs. Softy, he toned down beside her and leaned against the desk. "You look deep in thought," they said, "just thinking about everything." Emily replied, smiling up at him, "How much my life has changed because of you." Daniel reached down to gently take her hand. "You've changed my life too, and Hero's taught me just as much as she's taught you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the soft sound of Hero's breathing filling the room. Emily took a deep breath, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't known in years. "Do you think we're doing enough?" she asked. Suddenly her voice tinged with doubt. "There are so many animals out there, so many people who need help." Daniel squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We're doing what we can, Emily, and every little bit makes a difference. Look at their own. Chance, look at how many people their story has touched. That's a start." Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right." "And step at time?" asked the night deepened. Emily returned to her work, renewed determination. Hero and Chance remained by her side, their quiet presence a source of strength and inspiration. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with her loyal companions and Daniel's unwavering support, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As autumn deepened, Home's wheat pours began to make a tangible impact in the community. Daniel and Emily worked tirelessly, transforming their passion into action. The organization quickly gained traction, hosting adoption events, raising funds, and sharing stories of animals who had found new beginnings. Hero and Chance were of 10 the center of attention at these events, their calm and friendly demeanor drawing people in. One brisk Saturday morning, Emily stood beside a booth at the local park, the crisp air carrying the sound of children's laughter and the scent of fresh baked goods. The event was their largest, yet featuring adoptions towards a petting area and even a small stage for presentations. Hiro sat proudly beside her, a bright bandana around his neck with "Ask Me About My Story" embroidered on it. Chance meanwhile wagged his tail enthusiastically as she played with a group of children. Danielle approached a clipboard in hand and a wide grin on his face. "This turnout is incredible," he said, handing Emily a list of adoption applications. "I think we're going to find homes for at least a dozen animals today." Emily scanned the list, their hearts swelling with pride. "I can't believe how much we've accomplished. It feels surreal. It's because of you." Daniel said warmly, "Your courage to share your story." And Hero's haste inspired so many people. Before Emily could respond, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, you Emily?" She turned to see a woman holding the hand of a little boy, both of them looking nervously, hopefully. "I'm Emily. How can I help you?" The woman smiled. "Here." He's flicking to Hero. "We've heard about Hero and Chance, my son. Liam has been struggling since we lost our dog last year. He's been asking for another one, but we wanted to sure we found the right fit." Liam stepped forward hesitantly, his wide eyes fixed on her. Emily knelt down to his level, offering a reassuring smile. "This is Hero. Would you like to meet him?" Liam nodded, his small hands reaching out tentatively. Her responded immediately, leaning in to nuzzle the boy's hand. Liam giggled, his shyness melting away as she wrapped his arms around Hero's neck. The sight brought tears to Emily's eyes, a poignant reminder of the joy and healing that animals could bring. Daniel crouched beside them. "Here. Hero has a best friend too. Would you like to meet Chance?" At the mention of his name, Chance bounded over, his playful energy instantly capturing Liam's attention. The boy laughed as Chance licked his face, his happiness infectious. Watching them, the woman's expressions of tend. "I think we found the one," she said quietly. Emily helped them complete the adoption paperwork, her heart full as she watched Chance settle into Liam's arms. As they walked away, the boy's laughter echoing in the air, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. As the event wound down, Emily and Daniel took a moment to sit on a bench. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park. Emily began, her voice contemplative. "I used to think Hero saved my life just that one day at the wedding, but he's been saving me ever since in ways I never expected." Daniel nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "He's a reminder of what it means to trust, to love, and to fight for what's right. And now you're passing that gift on to others." Emily reached down to scratch Hero, her heart brimming with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without him or you." As darkness fell, the park grew quiet, the echoes of the day's laughter fading into the night. Emily felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that Hero's story, her story, had made a difference. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about giving hope, inspiring change, and creating connections that would last a lifetime. The days following the event were a world reflection. The success of Homesite Paws drew media attention, with local news outlets sharing stories of Hero, Chance, and the lives they had touched. Emily found herself juggling interviews and planning the organization's next steps, all while staying true to the heart of their mission. One afternoon, Emily received a phone call from a reporter. "Your story is extraordinary." The woman said, "We'd love to feature you and Hero in a special segment about community heroes." Emily hesitated, unsure about stepping further into the spotlight, but as she glanced at the row how was dozing peacefully at her feet, she knew the story wasn't just theirs to tell. It was a story of resilience, loyalty, and the power of connection. "Of course," Emily replied, "Hero, and I would be honored." The day of the interview arrived, and Emily prepared nervously, brushing Hero's fur and adjusting his band. Another porter and camera crew arrived at her home, transforming the cozy living room into a makeshift studio. Hero took to the attention, naturally sitting proudly beside Emily as the interview began. "What inspired you to start Home Sweet Paws?" The reporter asked, a new warm and inviting. Emily took a deep breath. "It started with Hero. He came into my life at a time when I needed him most, and he showed me what it means to trust and to fight for what truly matters. After everything we went through, I realized that there are so many animals out there just like her, awaiting for their own second chance." As she spoke, Emily recounted the story of her interrupted wedding, the pivotal moment when Hero had saved her life. She shared how that single act of bravery had set her on a path she never could have imagined. "What do you hope people take away from your story?" the reporter asked. Emily glanced down at her. Who looked up at her with his soulful eyes. "I hope people see that love and loyalty aren't just traits. They're actions. They're about standing by someone, protecting them, and believing in." A makeshift studio. Hero took to the attention, naturally sitting proudly beside Emily as the interview began. "What inspired you to start Home Sweet Paws?" the reporter asked, a new warm and inviting. Emily took a deep breath. "It started with Hero. He came into my life at a time when I needed him most, and he showed me what it means to trust and to fight for what truly matters. After everything we went through, I realized that there are so many animals out there just like her, awaiting for their own second chance." As she spoke, Emily recounted the story of her interrupted Wedding, the pivotal moment when Hero had saved her life. She shared how that single act of bravery had set her on a path she never could have imagined. What do you hope people take away from your story? The reporter asked. Emily glanced down at her. Ho looked up at her with his soulful eyes. I hope people see that love and loyalty aren't just traits. They're actions. They're about standing by someone, protecting them, and believing in